So our session has started, and we're going to welcome Michael Simonson to our presentation today. He's going to be talking to us about our books versus ebooks. And so without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to him and let him continue this fabulous presentation. Michael, welcome, and we're so glad you're here today.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? A couple smiley faces maybe? Can you hear me fine? See me? Smiley faces, please. Yes? Dr. Bucker, can you hear us? Turn your microphone on.
Remember that to use your smiley face in your participation
window. I hear you loud and clear, Mike.
Oh, thanks, Jared.
There's that smiley face. You can click it, and then you can choose to select. There we go. Awesome. We see you in the chat.
Hey, thanks, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. It's a return visit to this wonderful conference. I had a chance to talk last year, and I'm going to begin this afternoon for me, late morning for you, where I left off. Our books, real books versus ebooks. I'll explain what that means in just a second, but I am sure that some of you want to know who I am. Here's my website. On my website, I have literally hundreds of links to information about distance education, publishing, instructional technology, podcasts, webinars. Everything there is out in the open, and you can download if you feel so inclined. I'll put this presentation up there, or if anybody wants copies of these slides, you can just send me an email and I'll send you copies so that you have them. When people ask me where I'm from, I'm reluctant to say I'm from South Florida. Well, that's where I've lived for the last 18 years. I'm reminded of the line in one of the Star Trek movies where a reporter is interviewing Captain Kirk. And she says, I hear you're from outer space. And he says, no, I work in outer space. I'm from Iowa. Well, I work in South Florida, and I'll explain a little bit about where I work, but I'm from Iowa. I wasn't born there. I was born in New York City, but I was raised there. I went to college there at both Iowa State and the University of Iowa. I worked at a university there for 25 years. And so that's where, and I'm going back tomorrow for a few days to get out of the hot weather down here. Something else interesting happened to me today. I had a buddy named Colonel Randy Rube who reminded me that 47 years ago today, he first met me at Marine Corps boot camp in Quantico, Virginia. I wish he hadn't reminded me. It tells me a couple of things. First of all, I did that, and second, it was 47 years ago, so that means I had to be at least, well, never mind how old I am. This is an important day for two reasons for me now, 47 years ago, and today I get a chance to talk at this wonderful conference. I work at a place called a university named Nova Southeastern University. Here's a schematic of the main campus. There are 9 campuses around the country and around the state of Florida, all relatively modern, started in 1972, has 25,000 students, a law school, business school, oceanography center. If you ever take a cruise out of Port Everglades, you go right by our oceanographic center right on the inlet there, medical school, nursing. But very few people outside of South Florida have ever heard of Nova Southeastern for one reason. They don't have any Division I basketball or football teams. We're Division II. Says something about the notoriety of a lot of the institutions, the great institutions around the country. You get a lot of publicity when you work for when you are at a university that has that kind of exposure every Saturday or during the fall. They're on TV a lot. Nova Southeastern, I'm in a doctoral program that delivers the majority of its instruction online. I'm interim chair right now for a department titled Instructional Design and Technology that offers 2 doctoral degrees, one in instructional technology and distance education, and one in curriculum and teaching. The Fischler College, where I work, has 5 departments, 4 other departments, and offers these doctoral programs. It's an interesting phenomenon. We're not going to talk necessarily about it today, but how this proliferation of virtual schools at the K-12 level, online learning at the university and college level, and e-learning at the business level have really become mainstream in the last decade or decade and a half. Nova Southeastern is accredited in SACS, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. CAPE used to be NCAPE. And so it's a pretty good place to work because we're in North Miami Beach. It's kind of fun, as a matter of fact. I got to stop and tell a story. My friends all tell me, don't tell jokes, Mike, because you're not any good at it. It's not your style. But every time I give a presentation like this, and this one's kind of different, I'm reminded of the first presentation I ever gave. It was right after I graduated from the University of Iowa. It was a national conference. It was in New Orleans, in the French Quarter. My presentation was scheduled for 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I walked down the hallway and they were setting up the tables, you know, with the portable bars next to them and the little tables people would sit at and chat and bringing out the food for the happy hour. I walked into my session about 15 minutes early. The room was deserted. No one there. So I looked at my schedule and I was in the right place, and so I was pretty disappointed. I was a young assistant professor. So I walked back out. I was tempted to order a Corona, but I didn't, and I waited for a little while, and 2 or 3 minutes before my session was to begin, a gentleman walked in, sat down in the second row, and I was relieved. I said to myself, you know, if he came to listen to my session, by golly, I'm going to do my level best to give a great session. So I went in, had my 15 minutes, gave my session, had my stack of overhead transparencies on the overhead projector. Really did, I thought, a bang-up job. And when I was done, I walked up to thank him for coming. I said, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. You don't know what it means to me. And he got this startled look on his face. And he stared at me and he said, I hope you're not leaving. I'm next on the program. Well, thank you all for being here, and please don't leave. And there's more than one person on this queue of people that are attending. By the way, he and I became friends. I sat through his session. It was good when we went out to the happy hour. And every year we would meet at the conference and sort of chuckle about our first experiences together. That's it. I won't tell any more jokes. What are we going to talk about today? Well, I made the assumption that if you're coming to a session by an author about authoring, that probably you want to learn a little bit about how you can go about publishing yourself. I don't think most people care what authors do. They want to know how to become an author. At least I hope that's why you're here. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to give you some tips. I'm going to explain some things that all of us as professionals might want to consider. And then I'm going to do a little editorializing at the end. I've got an hour. I don't know if we'll use that much, but I want to make a little editorial here at the end about a position that I see that's beginning to emerge, and I think all of us in the educational community need to be a little bit aware of. A couple of the books that I've written, here's one, The Perfect Online Course, that I co-authored with Dr. Anna Oriana, one of my colleagues here. Here's a book on distance education definition and glossary of terms, which I've also co-authored with a woman from University of Oregon. Here's a textbook that I've now in the 6th edition, Teaching and Learning at a Distance, Foundations of Distance Education. I share this with you because this book used to be published by one of the largest publishers in the world, Pearson. Now it's published by one of the smaller publishers in the world, Information Age Publishing. And I'll talk a little bit about why I switched from Pearson, this international conglomerate, to a much smaller publisher, modern day publisher. So if you think I was going to talk about bodice rippers or how to write your first novel, I'm really here to talk about scholarly writing, professional writing. Here's something else I wanted to share too. This is one of the best books in our field. This is the Systematic Design of Instruction by Carey, Dick, and Carey. This is probably the intellectual technique of people in the instructional technology field. And I want to call your attention that it's shrink-wrapped and it's loose leaf with 3 hole punches. And I'll explain why that's somewhat alarming to me as I present things. By the way, oh, somebody said they laughed out loud. I love that. Made my day. If there's a question, type it in at the bottom. If I don't see it, someone just say, hey, Simonson, there's a question at the bottom, and I'll either answer it then or we'll go, when we have time at the end, we'll go back and we'll take a look at all those questions. I'll try to answer them. Where did we leave off? And it's not bookicide. I think I mentioned that in my last session. But the death of the book was a question that I asked last year when I did this conference. A couple of statements here. Textbook, yeah, well, you can read as well as I. Horace Mann, Jane Smiley. Everybody know who Jane Smiley is? She wrote the book. Was it Anne of a Thousand Acres? Or also Moo, a book about higher education and some of the issues there. But when I had a chance to present last year, I talked about the 5 themes for this textbook and used those themes as an example of a process that I think successful textbook writers use, and that they identify thematic concepts that they want to make sure their textbook contains, that sort of drives the contents of the textbook, that are permeated throughout the textbook, that are found in all chapters of the textbook. And I said, now, is the textbook evolving? And that's part of the title for today. And what implications does that have for we authors, people who either are or want to be authors? Okay, let's first talk about you. I've already sort of moved into this idea of themes. Most of us, when we grow up, assuming we ever do, never really consider ourselves to be textbook authors or book authors, or even authors for that matter. But many of us either decide that's something we want to do, or in maybe more instances are told that's something we have to do, especially if we're in higher education. And so we start to think about, how do I do this? I mean, what's the process? Well, obviously I had a boss that I worked for once. He said, Simonson, you don't write anything. I said, well, yeah, I guess. He says, do you have any good ideas? I says, well, I have a lot of good ideas. He says, well, where are the artifacts of those good ideas? And I says, well, what do you mean by that? My classes get high evaluations. And he said, no, the scholar, the educator, the artifacts of your thinking are the things you write, the things you share with others. And of course, I got mad at him. We all get mad when our mothers and our department heads give us advice, but as I've reflected back on it, he was exactly correct. And so I began to shadow authors, maybe do what some of you are doing. Take a look at what they did and they do as they want to publish. I want to share some of those ideas with you. First of all, you have to have this, I guess we're looking at this thematic approach, and some very simple ideas. Every book that is going to be, well, I shouldn't say every, what do I know about every, but it's my observation that books that are actually completed often as not begin with a topic outline. Remember topic outlines from junior high or middle school? You know, the bullets, the points. And what that is a way to fracture, to divide up, but yet show relationships between, what's the same thing our English teachers told us back in middle school, or when we learned how to do topic outlines, not narrative outlines, but topic outlines. Something I'll come back to, writing 500 words a day. Anybody that tries to write more than 500 words a day is probably writing 500 pretty good words, and anything above that is probably pretty bad. So we'll visit that idea also. Scholarly books are books that have 12 to 15 chapters, and edited books like this one by Dr. Oriana, where there are a series of authors, have 10 to 25 chapters. Okay. As I would talk about writing with professors and educators that I knew and got to know, they would share these ideas with me. First, they would say, here's my publication plan. Here are the 4 aspects of what I want to do over the next 10 or 15 years. And here's the steps in that process, and I'll share that with you. Then I identify the ideas that I think are worth publishing, and what the same department had said, write a book about robotics. Robotics are the big thing. Well, he was right. That was 30 years ago. I wish I had written about robotics. I'd be a robotics expert today, but I didn't. That didn't trip my trigger. I wasn't I wasn't interested in robotics. But again, this is an academic activity. So what are the areas you're really interested in? And what are the areas you see within your interests that probably warrant some kind of a publication or a series of publications? And I'll give some examples. Building manuscripts, getting published, the sequence of events starts small, how many manuscripts, handling rejection, and keeping track, your resume. All these are individual sessions at this conference by themselves. What's a publication plan? Well, it's what I just very briefly indicated it was. How do you identify ideas worth publishing? Well, you read the publications of others. How do you build manuscripts? I'm going to talk about that in 2 slides. And then getting published. Where do we go to get published? We don't write the great novel Gone with the Wind, at least most of us don't, as our first and only, well, I guess, first and one of 2 great novels. Most of us begin with little things. And how do we work around this idea that whoever we send our writing to may not be something that someone else appreciates or likes? How do we handle rejection? What good is it? Okay. Let's be specific. Most budding authors begin by starting small. I edit 2 scholarly journals. One's a professional journal, one is a blind research journal. A blind, well, yeah, you get blind if you read it too much because the letters are so small. But one where there is an editorial review board who review the manuscripts without any attribution to who authored that manuscript or who wrote that manuscript. The scholarly journal. But in almost every journal that I've been associated with, either as editor or part of the editorial board, the editors crave short pieces, columns, letters to the editor, the kinds of things that get you published but don't require months or weeks or years of work, but rather a knowledgeable person who is observing the events of their discipline and then wants to share their observations. The first couple of the articles that I wrote, I went back and dug this out. One was titled Revive the Opaque. Probably nobody in this group remembers the opaque projector. Remember, it's the one you used to take a book and you could project on the wall. And it was the predecessor, some say, of the overhead projector. That's how far back it goes. But I wrote an article once that was 500 words long, and it was Revive the Opaque. It's how the opaque projector that's in the back room of your school, how you might use it in your media center. And it's basically to produce super graphics. Project something on the wall, trace it on butcher paper or whatever on the wall itself. And it was a nice little article that said, holy smokes, I got published. And then the next one was for more organized film editing, another 500-word piece that talked about a relatively simple idea, and that's in Super 8 film editing called the trim bin, which is something that you make yourself so that you can organize these little snippets of film and put them back together to tell a story. Now, conceptually, those are generic ideas. In other words, get rid of the opaque and you put some other way to do super graphics. Or we talk now about for more organized podcast editing. And we talk about iMovie or Windows Movie Maker. But these little short articles are almost, if appropriate, impossible for editors to reject and give us a line in our Vita if we're just looking for lines in our Vita, the same as a book does, but also give us a leg up on building our confidence that we can in first publishing. The next example is presentations. Like this one, most conference sessions, they fill up. There are a lot of people who submit. Not everybody gets accepted. We all know that, and I think we tend to concentrate on the rejections rather than the acceptance. But if you go to conferences, and you sit in on the planning sessions, that people say, well, let's put a session together where we bring in 10 journal editors or 3 journal editors and have them talk about publishing. And then you can raise your hand and say, well, I'd like to work on that. I'll help, and I know a couple of the editors. And in other words, what I'm saying is there are ways to get yourself into the presentation activities, the kinds of things that will get you on the program and then get you that opportunity, those opportunities. You need to actually submit some more substantive things in upcoming conferences that you attend for your professional area. You're probably beginning to understand, if this makes sense, is that you start small and you work on this publication plan over years, even decades, well, in my case, in multiple decades. Then you identify what are the sure thing articles. Well, gender is always a sure thing article. What editor can reject an article that examines the gender variable in their area of influence? Now, that's frivolous, I know. Not gender, I'm not writing about gender, but let's talk about the sure thing articles. The sure thing articles, if you read journals, especially if the journals have editorial comments in them, almost always there are comments made about, we would entertain favorably an article on this topic. I'm going to talk about a couple today in my little editorial at the end. A lot of editors will write this editorial and say, you know, Edgar Dale's cone of experience has been around a long time. People have misconstrued it. I'd like someone to talk about how Edgar Dale's cone of experience is relevant in visual literacy research today, for example. Well, sure thing. How are they going to turn that down? Collaborate and be a collaborator. When you meet people of like mind, volunteer to work with them and help them on their projects. How can they then refuse to volunteer to help you on your projects? And finally, mine your research. What does that mean? Well, let's say, for example, you've just completed your doctoral dissertation. With that doctoral dissertation, you should have 4 publications. You should have, you know, a research publication that goes into one of these referee journals I talked about, a position paper article where you talk about why this issue is very important, a presentation at a national convention, and social media, the emerging area of massive importance even to those of us who are talking about scholarly publications. Well, how do we go? How do we go about this? All right. I love this quote. Sir, where do you get your ideas for your movies? An admirer of Alfred Hitchcock. By watching other directors' movies. Where do you get ideas for writing? By watching what other people do, by reading what other people have written, by observing the YouTube videos that other people have put together, by reading the blogs, by paying attention to what those who are a few jumps ahead of you in this publishing plan are doing. And then don't mimic, but learn from them and then carve out your own area of interest. Keep a journal. Every teacher I've ever talked to, if they go to happy hour, at the end of the day has a story to tell about what happened that day in school. Maybe not every day, but in a 180-day school year, probably 90 of those days, something happened. You can't believe what this kid said to me today. Those are pearls, are gems. Write them down. Keep a journal. It's the kind of books, you know, we're getting into non-scholarly books that people like to pick up at the airport before they get on the plane and read about the 100 things that happened to me as a 4th grade teacher. Great stuff. You might make some money at it too. Events. Talk to others. Find out what people are saying, doing, and what they see as the emerging areas of interest. Every time you're assigned to do something, whether it's in your school, your university, your job, produce artifacts. Remember my boss, my department head said, you got a lot of good ideas, you think, Simonson, but where are the artifacts of those good ideas? The artifacts are the publications. Not the only artifact, but every time you're asked to do something, see if, mine it, see if there is a artifact, especially publishable artifact, whether it's a proceedings, whether it's a report, whether it's whatever. Those things build your confidence in and your ability to pull together more substantive kinds of things. Read what other people write. Find out what the trends are. Identify the problems. We all talk about the problems, we talk about the solutions, but why are the problems important? There's superficial reasons, but there are probably much more substantive reasons right below the surface. Think about them. Talk about why do you suppose and talk to people about that and see what they say. Observations, keep track. And research is the coin of the realm in education, but it is such a difficult and massively time-consuming thing to do that if most of us as educators do some scientific methods-based research a couple of times in our careers, we're probably okay. That's probably all we can expect. But all these other things are something we might be doing all the time. Okay, how do I write? Well, I mentioned start with an outline. Topic outline. Stay away from narrative outlines. Topic outlines. Write a segment at a time and put it aside. Write a little bit every day. What did I say? 500 words. No, you have your outline. Take one of the topics on the outline and write that. The strategy that I use and many others that I've talked to use is you write that 500 words, you put it aside, you go to happy hour, you read it over while you're drinking your Perrier water, and you edit it, but you put it aside until the next day or the next time you write the next 500 words, and you start your next 500 words by reading and polishing those edits from the previous 500. That reminds you of what you've written and then gets you started on this next 500 words, this next hour's worth of work. Segment at a time. Proofread and correct the segment, then write the next segment. That's what I just said, I guess. Read the process over and over until a section of this outline is completed, and then do the next section, and then do the next section, and come back. I've told doctoral students that write your chapter 1 first, write your chapter 3 second. Chapter 1 is the problem, chapter 3 is the method. Then go back and tackle that literature review side. Many people tackle the most difficult part first. Get some things accomplished. So if you're writing something like a journal, write down the things that are obvious, that are easy, and then delve into those more difficult things. Get yourself started, and that way you won't get stuck on the difficult situation. Then have someone else review, critique, and edit. The worst person in the world to edit what you've written is somebody who likes you, and somebody who likes you a lot. Did I freeze up there?
Nope, you're good. We can hear you.
Just to let you know, I've lost audio and video.
All right, have you got me back now?
Yes,
Good.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
Can you see me?
I hear you. Let me.
The worst person is someone who likes you a lot, because they're probably not going to want to hurt your feelings. Now, some husbands and wives do that regularly, but probably someone who is a colleague who knows that you're going to review and edit what they've written. And so it's a quid pro quo. You do for me, I'll do for you. And I won't get mad at you if you don't get mad at me. That's the kind of writing criticism we want. The last thing we want is somebody to say, wow, I didn't realize how smart you are. That's the greatest thing. If you get a person like that, savor them. They are extremely rare and difficult to find, so don't let them get away. Okay, now, here's a technique that I like to talk about. I've cobbled together a couple of presentations. I've done this presentation a couple of times, the first sentence approach. The line is, if you've got a great first sentence, the next 5,000 are easy. Well, okay, let me just give a couple of examples here. Remember the movie Love Story? The first line in that is, what can you say about a 25-year-old girl who died? That she was beautiful and brilliant, that she loved Mozart and Bach, the Beatles, and me. It gives me goosebumps just reading it, even though I've read it 100 times, from the movie Love Story. Who was it? Ryan O'Neal and who was the woman? Ally McGraw. Yeah, good. Thanks, Marty. Citizen Kane, Rosebud. We didn't know what was Rosebud until at the end when they burned the sled. Here's one of my favorites. Full Metal Jacket. I'm Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, your senior drill instructor. From now on, you will speak only when spoken to, and the first and last words out of your filthy service will be, sir. Do you maggots understand this? Remember that movie? Great one. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. The only thing wrong with this is Marine Corps enlisted NCOs don't want to be called sir. They don't want to be confused with being officers. But anyway, great first lines. What's great about a first line? It sort of sets the tone and tenor for what the rest of the lines are going to be about, doesn't it? You know what a love story is going to be about. You don't know what Rosebud's going to be about, but that keeps coming up all through the movie. And then at the end you say, oh, that's why he acted the way he did. And Gunnery Sergeant Hartman obviously gets shot. Here's some more from novels. Call Me Ishmael. All right. It was a bright, cold day in April. The clocks were striking 13. All right. Someone must have slandered Joseph K. for one morning while having done anything truly wrong. He was arrested. You can read these as well as I. Mother died today. Huh. All this happened more or less. They shot the white girl first. Great first lines. There's a couple more. You can read them over. He was an old man who fished alone in a skiff in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf Stream. And he had gone 84 days now without taking a fish. Elmer Gantry was drunk. It was love at first sight. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Anyway, a great first line is not something you start with. But as you write things, you think about what is important. What is the overarching idea behind what it is you're writing, whether it's a short piece or it's a more comprehensive document, whether it's a book or a blog. And start with that idea. Maybe not the purpose of this blog is to. Never start with the word though when you write, by the way. It makes everybody think it's going to be boring. So let them discover that later if it is. Don't tip them off. But something that the author needs to help the author understand what it is he or she is writing about. And it sets that tone and tenor. And Elmer Gantry was drunk. Well, if you've ever watched Elmer Gantry, you know that what Sinclair Lewis was talking about there. That sort of permeated the whole book. Okay, I've got to move along here. Let's 4 types of publications. I mentioned this. If you're going to publish, and probably this should be the other way around, but let's talk about them. Presentations, we've already talked about. Journals, we've talked about. Books. Increasingly, social media are becoming academically relevant. Whether it's a blog, a website, a YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, look at what the movie stars and the rock stars do. You know, I don't think they do their own Twitter feeds, and they probably don't do their own blogs. Somebody does it for them. But it has become the manifestation of whomever the Twitter feed is about or from. It's the rationale. Let me go. This is another thing you do in presentations at your desktop. Make sure you unplug your phone. Which I just did. If you've not examined channels in social media like YouTube, go in and look at the sequences of things that people have put together, the kind of things that most educators could do. As we produce podcasts, generally the podcasts, not all of them related to one central theme or one series of ideas, but they may be divided into 3 or 4 channels. And so what we're seeing scholars doing, authors do, is they're starting a blog. They go to Blogger, they start a blog, they take these things that they post every day, instead of just writing them on a sheet of lined notebook paper, they're blogging that idea, saving those blogs as the components of something that might be a more substantive and traditional publication down the road. A website, take a look at my website, not necessarily the best in the world, but it has a lot of stuff there related to what I do. And so it becomes a representation of what I do. You want to know what Simonson thinks he knows about? Go to his website. Take a look at the presentations. Take a look at the videos. Take a look at the podcasts. Take a look at the short documents that he has linked there. And you can kind of get an essence. Rather than looking at a person's resume or vita, you can look at the artifacts of what they think they know about. YouTube videos doesn't cost anything. Any of these things are all free. And they are ways to demonstrate to that skeptical person we work for, or our skeptical person ourselves that we work for, that these are the artifacts of my thinking. These are the things that I know about, and here are the things I'm willing to share with others. Okay, in publishing we have choices. We're getting down to the fun part, for me at least. I've talked about these because I hope this will help you, but I've noticed, and we probably need some research on this, there is a trend happening across the world in all disciplines, but in the publishing business, we now have the massive conglomerate international publishers. I mentioned Pearson as one of them, McGraw-Hill. There are others. We can go down the list. Increasingly, these publishing houses are buying up the smaller publishing houses to buy their line of materials, their books. Pearson bought out Prentice Hall, several publishers, and now they own these lines. They basically own the content, and this is what publishers really want, the content in a particular discipline. If you go to some disciplines, it's almost impossible not to buy a Pearson book, for example, if you want to have it in your class. And this is not just in higher education, but also these massive publishing houses tend to dominate disciplines at the K-12 level also. Then you have the category of what I call the new model publishers, the modern day publishers. These publishers are characterized by a couple of things. One is they don't have warehouses full of books. Rather, they have servers full of books. And if you order a book from them, instead of them going to their warehouse and pulling it off the shelf and sticking it in an envelope and mailing it to you, they push a button, figuratively, and a book is printed. If you want a printed book, it's bound, and it goes to an automatic mailing system, and it arrives at your doorstep or your library or your school. In other words, they're using the technology to produce the books that we want, that we need. And we're seeing increasingly the legitimization of self-publishing. Why do we need to go to a Pearson or to an information-age publishing after all, when we can go to eBay or we can go to other places to list the publications that we have created and we have bound and we have made available ourselves, sometimes for a price. Remember that first slide. I mean, I say scientists or scholars don't publish for money, they publish for impact. Well, most of us in education are not publishing to make a lot of money, because you don't make a lot of money, but rather, with a few instances, within a few exceptions, but rather we have ideas that we want to share with others as part of our professional persona. And so self-publishing, especially with the popularization of and legitimization of social media, is becoming increasingly popular. And now we get down to the real book, ebook, or both. And let's go to the next slide, and I'll come back to that. 3 years ago, I was asked to do the 6th edition of my textbook, Teaching and Learning at a Distance. And my editor at Pearson called me and said, let's do your book. We're ready to do a 6th edition. We want, there's too many used copies on the marketplace, and so we're not selling new ones, so let's do a next edition so that the used copies are out of date, which should have been a clue to me what was coming. So I gave all kinds of ideas about this and that and the other thing, and said, oh, and by the way, we're not going to publish your book in a bound version. I said, oh, hey, wait a second, what do you mean, not publish it in a bound version? He said, no, it's going to be an ebook. I said, well, of course, there should be an ebook version of every book. If that's what people want, they should have that option. I said, but some of us want a bound book. I think the definition of a bound book is pretty clear. It's got a spine, it's got pages, it's got a cover. And they said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. I said, well, what about people who don't have access to your server or don't want an electronic version? They said, well, okay, they can purchase a 3-ring, 3-hole punched version. I said, well, why can't they? Well, the story goes on. Pearson decided in their education line, they were no longer going to offer the bound book version. They were only going to offer the e-book. So there would be no our books, only e-books. And while the cost of the e-book was going to come down for the purchaser of that book from, let's say, $75 to $50, the person who purchased it would only purchase access to it on the Pearson servers for 6 months. After 6 months was up, they wanted to keep the book, access to the e-book, they had to purchase a continuing contract. And the book could not be downloaded, could only be accessed online through a web service supplied by Pearson, unless you wanted to order and purchase a 3-ring version, which cost $75, not $50. After a number of discussions with my colleagues who publish books, I decided that wasn't a viable option. I didn't think that was right. Now, my books tend to be purchased by college students and college graduate students, and you can make the case that they need a bookshelf so they can pull off the shelf, and they need it for a career, not for 6 months. Now, the discussion about K-12 books is interesting too, because do we need textbooks in kids' hands in middle school when they're studying algebra, or is an e-book good enough? Unfortunately, those decisions are being made for us by the publishers rather than by the educators. And it's my opinion that textbooks are content, textbooks are a professional responsibility, not an administrative prerogative, and certainly not a publisher's prerogative. So my editorial is pretty clear, even though there are a lot of advantages to ebooks. Cheaper to produce. They told me, they said, I said, well, if the book only costs $50, my 10% royalty means, that means the retail price is $30. That means I'll get $3 a book. So that's half what I would have gotten with it. They said, well, but we won't sell any used copies, so you'll make more in the long run. I said, no, that doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It's not about the money, but there is an impact on the author, too. You don't have access to your content. They don't give you a copy. They give you a bound version copy. I think that means 15 minutes left. But the electronic book, the e-book, is of critical importance for all these reasons. Portable, instantly, audio option, defeat censorship. I don't know where that comes from, but overcome disabilities because the technology can help with any disabilities a reader might have. But there are also some disadvantages. Content control is lost. The life of the book is lost. Royalties, maybe I shouldn't be talking about royalties, but even though you only may make a couple of $1,000s off of a textbook you spent 3 years writing, that's better than making half that, or there is some incentive there. And so let me conclude my little editorial. As I've said several times, writing is an artifact of thinking. So we write. Education is a necessity. We need to be educated, and books are an essence of writing. And some would say possibly of thinking. I would love to see studies conducted on the impact of e-books on the learning process of children at any age level, and young adults at any age level, maybe senior adults at any age level. I would like to see the implications of these decisions being made for educators by our publishers and maybe by our administrators, and what role the teacher, the professor, the trainer has in this process of evolving from something we've known and loved. If you're watching a session like this on Meet the Authors, you're probably interested in books. You probably read a lot of books. You probably like books. To something that is not there anymore. And maybe I'm oversimplifying things, but I think the decisions are ones that are worth investigation. Now, if I'm invited back again, I will report at the next Texas conference on the results of the studies we're going to conduct on the impact of ebooks on learning. Thank you much for listening. We have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. So let's Q&A. And if you'd like to type in a question, type it in. If you want to get online audio, we can make that work too. So have at me.
Feel free to post a question in the chat, or you may click your talk button and you may take the microphone.
Yeah, special ed, you know, and certainly in a lot of disciplines, in every discipline, the electronic book has a place. Don't let me be misunderstood. Should that place be a monopoly place at the exclusion of any other options? That's the part I think we need to be careful about. The ability, the list of advantages of ebooks that I listed on that slide very quickly, and it's just a partial list, are very important. They're wonderful advantages. But the question is that are they advantages that trump other advantages of the R book? Thanks, Monica.
Does anyone else have anything they want to ask or add before I turn off the recording?
Yeah, let me just respond to this question about when you refer back. Next time you go to a bookshelf to pull a book off the shelf, to open up, to see to look up something you can't remember, think about what we've talked about for the last 45 minutes. And, well, you could certainly Google something like who was in the movie Love Story with Ryan O'Neal. Are there some other things that maybe we don't want to Google, but we want to have that reference book with us?
I have a question. You referenced the punch hole book. What difference does it make whether it has holes or not? I mean, it's still a book that someone can have in hand.
Yeah, well, if this is a Xerox book, it's not a printed book like, you know, if you bought Dick and Carey's book or any book, you know. If I ripped it open, the cover's in cover and the back's in cover, but all the pages inside are Xerox pages, and it's not bound. You know, I guess I could take this to my local, you know, come and go or someplace and have it bound into a book, but and so yeah, you know, is that a critical issue? Well, I guess time will tell, but in education we ought to be basing these decisions on something more than just the whim and the profit motive of the people who publish the books. Good point. You know, sitting ovation, but how about a happy face ovation? Huh? Smiley face? Thanks, Jared. Come on, the rest of you, give me a smiley face. Make me feel good. It was 47 years ago. Today I reported to the Marine Corps. Make me feel good.
Michael, this was wonderful. You're a very animated speaker online, and that's so important. It makes it a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing with us today.
I had fun. Thank you for asking me.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're with us. I'm going to move us along through the conclusion. Remember that the recordings will be available starting tomorrow. If you attended the session, you'll receive automatic credit for CPE credit for this session. And there's also badges available, and credit will be ongoing through next July. So, and again, this recording will be available starting tomorrow, and you can reference this recording for a solid year until next year's conference continues. And there he's posted where he is teaching and where he is on staff.